Good morning and welcome to the Mayoral Priority Skills Fund market engagement video. This video is to support people who didn't attend the launch on the 27th of July and is open to everybody who wants to get to it from our website. What I'm going to do now is take you through a series of slides. I'm going to turn off my video, mainly so I'm not looking at myself during the recording, and I might be looking at the side and not the screen as well, so there's probably no point in seeing my face. So my name is Nicola Walworth. I'm project manager for the Mayoral Priority Skills Fund, and I'm going to take you through it. It will probably take about an hour, maybe less, so we'll see how we go. The purpose of the session is to share the technical aspects of Mayoral Priority Skills Fund and the application process. So you'll find some of the slides potentially fairly dry, but it's to make sure you've got the technical information. I also urge you, as we're going through, to think about your individual role in this funding and next steps. And there's opportunities for you to ask questions. Please note this slide pack should not be used without consulting details set out in the wider application paperwork, specifically the specification documents. I haven't replicated the specification documents in these slides, although the information relates back, and you won't have all of the information you need to apply just from this slide pack. So it would not be advised that this is used instead of reading all of the application paperwork provided. And this is the recording that's made available. These slides are the same as we used for the face-to-face event yesterday, so we could ignore that last bit. Just to take a step back and talk a little bit about the principles of the Mayoral Priority Skills Fund and what this fund is trying to do in the region before we dive into the details. So the Mayoral Priority Skills Fund is aligned to our mayoral priorities and specifically our employment and skills plan in our area. And the approach is that we take an evidence-based look at where we have gaps in our skills system and where we have gaps in provision. And we use lots of intelligence sources to do that. Our main source of intelligence is our Skills Connect portal, and we'll talk about Skills Connect in a bit more detail. But we use a vast array of other evidence to help us understand where the gaps are and where we may have gaps in progression pathways. We might have gaps in models of delivery, which means that certain groups are missing out, and we might have geographical challenges as well and black spots where people can't access the provision that they need. And some of that intelligence comes from evidence from wider delivery within the combined authority. Some of that comes from things like our LSIP reports in the region and other internal data, for example, our data cube. And also, if we need to, we pull together groups of experts in terms of key stakeholders in the region, and we'll do additional intelligence gathering sessions. And we've done that for some of the areas of this fund. So we're making 4 lots available through this fund, but the idea is that Mayoral Priority Skills Fund has longevity, and actually it is a mechanism that we can long-term look for funding and apply for our own internal funding, so that we constantly have a pot that will support where we have gaps in provision that appear, so that we can respond quickly and in an agile fashion to emerging needs. So we expect further funding calls under this fund. As well as some of our central recovery initiatives funding, where the majority of funding actually in this call is from People and Skills from UKSPF. So that does bring with it certain funding rules and certain requirements from government. So you will see that shaped into our funding. So as just a brief update on UKSPF, that is 3.2 million to support the people and skills aspect of our funding. And there are certain priorities that we set out to government which really match some of the gaps in the provision that we have found for this funding call. And that's why we found it would be an advantage to link up that UKSPF funding alongside Mayoral Priority Skills Fund for this initial call. So some of those priorities are supporting residents in work to progress, funding to address local skills needs and priority skills for the region's future, reducing economic activity, especially for our long-term unemployed, and supporting young people not in education, employment and training. That is a mixture of some funding, that 3.2 million, where we will continue to support programmes, but some of that funding, the majority of that funding actually is being put into this funding call, which is open. Okay, I'll move on to the next slide. So we're going to go through the 4 lots that we have allocated under this initial call. You'll notice they're quite broad brush themes. So we have gone for some quite open areas where we have need across lots of areas of our economy, and for in a way, broad brush target groups most in need. So we'll come to some common themes about this fund, but one of those common themes is that we rely on applicants to come forward with their own additional evidence around their proposal. So our first lot is modular training. This is where we have had a wealth of intelligence from employers about the need for shorter, stackable, modular style courses that might be more flexible and are much shorter than some of the other funding, the other training mechanisms that we have that are funded in the region. So for example, for some areas such as certain green licenses for green skills we simply don't need training that is long as bootcamp training or apprenticeship training, and in some areas employers are just crying out for shorter courses where their employees can pick and choose, almost like a pick and mix style, to build themselves a very personalised training and upskilling programme. So we have identified some key areas with employers and in various reports that are employer-led, for example, our LSIT reports. Around some areas we have identified this would really work. So digital skills at lots of different levels, those green skills developments, functional skills development, and leadership and management. But there will be others, and we are very open to that in applicants coming forward with their ideas and with their own evidence. So we also have done quite a bit of our intelligence gathering around talking about upskilling people in work who are economically active, but we will open this up, and again, where there is evidence of need, we will support proposals that are aimed at people out of work with to help them progress towards work or into work with stackable modular training courses. There's some other things to note around the modular training. So employer engagement is highly recommended, probably for obvious reasons. We need to be confident in proposals that employers are involved and closely linked with the content of that modular skills training, ensuring that it meets their priority skills needs, and that we are confident that employers are going to support people to progress in work, or that employers are benefited from this type of training. Specific outputs and outcomes I haven't set out here, and that is because we'll talk about UKSPF specific outputs and outcomes later on, and they do vary depending on the proposal that you're putting forward and the types of groups that you might be targeting to take part. And there's also flexibility around you as an applicant setting out what those outputs will be as a result of your training. For this one, we've put a minimum grant value of 150,000 and a maximum grant value of 800,000. Some of those are quite high. So again, another common theme that we'll come back to is that idea of consortia partnerships being very welcome, managing partnership arrangements, being very welcome under this fund. For this particular lot, we expect a minimum of 75% of people who enrol and who are eligible to complete that training and gain an output. and a minimum of 65% who do complete and do retain an output should go on to achieve an outcome. Lot 2 is around apprenticeship support. We've left this fairly open, but the main aim is to support our need in the region to encourage more people to enter apprenticeships. We have a particular need in our region around young people, but proposals don't have to be aimed at young people. And we also have a trend in the region, which is very similar nationally, that we have a lower than expected completion rates of apprenticeships. So we are looking at programmes that deal with one, either or of those issues, or both of them at the same time, both encouraging people to enter apprenticeships and encouraging people to complete their apprenticeships. We've been quite open because we would like to see innovative ideas around doing that, but we very much welcome projects that support apprenticeships into priority skills needs for our employers and priority sectors, and also making sure that their programmes are accessible and supporting those groups that could most benefit from entering apprenticeships, but also groups who may be in the greatest need of completing their apprenticeships. And that will probably need quite a bit of wraparound support, individualised around people's specific barriers and needs that support them to complete their apprenticeship. And then that all probably comes back to, again, you'll see this as a theme throughout, that need to work collaboratively across the region and build those wider partnerships with services that can provide that wraparound support. So other things to note. The UKSPF outputs and outcomes will need you to be clear whether you're targeting economically inactive groups or active participants. And of course, that's going to probably be different whether your proposal here is looking at people who are in apprenticeships or whether you're supporting people to get into apprenticeships. But you do need to be clear. You can have a mixture, but that's just to flag when you're looking at mapping your proposal to those UKSPF outputs and outcomes. You'll just need to be aware of what groups you are looking at, because there are different outputs and outcomes for each of those. Don't be put off by those outputs and outcomes. Government are very aware that some of the outcomes that are set out for people who are in work are quite high achieving. So just to give you an example, probably one of the main outcomes that would be appropriate for this project, if somebody was in work, would be achieving an outcome of completing their qualification. There is probably no way that during the time we've got to deliver that somebody is going to complete their apprenticeship in the time you're delivering your programme. Government are well aware of this, and we're already in conversations, and they're very supportive, as I understand, of showing evidence that they are working towards that outcome by the end of the programme. So that could be that a participant has completed a specific milestone in their apprenticeship training, or that there is a letter from their employer about how engaged they are and that they have been, as a result of the intervention, supported to remain in their apprenticeship for 3 months or more. Things like that, I think we can be flexible around, so please don't let that put you off. And you can also work with our team either through the application process, or if your application is successful, into initiation, to think about the best data to collect that show people are working towards those outcomes. We have allocated 150,000 to this particular lot, and we will look at a minimum grant value of 50 and a maximum grant value of 150. We have set a minimum of 65% of those who enrol achieving outputs, and a minimum of 65% of those who achieve those outputs should go on to progress into an outcome. Lot 3 is around communities. So we still know that we have groups, localised groups out in our communities in our region, who are still continuing to suffer from disadvantage as a result of COVID. And also now being disadvantaged by other crises such as the cost of living crisis. We also know there is support that was out there to support people furthest from our workforce with multiple barriers to engaging in skills and employability services, and that some of those have come to an end because of funding streams such as ESF coming to an end and some of those services. And our own community support fund here at the CAF has also come to an end. So we know there is gaps in that intensive wraparound support for individuals. We've left this open again to the types of groups that programmes might be targeting, and also the types of interventions that might engage them, gain trust, support them to move towards those mainstream services. Mainstream services could be anything from DWP funded services, working with the job centre as an example, to things like adult education budget funded community learning, volunteering in their local area, or it could be that their next step is a different type of support. So before they can move on in their employment and skills journey, that individual needs to support to link in with healthcare services, other key workers, financial support, housing support, for example. So this will require applicants to have strong evidence bases of their knowledge of the target groups that they're looking to work with, the types of barriers those target groups have, and how their proposal removes those barriers. We know from some of the work we've done with these types of vulnerable groups and disadvantaged groups that their needs are multiple, and that is continuing to happen post-COVID. So we are dealing with very vulnerable people who have multiple barriers to engagement, and we do understand that projects might need to have several steps in terms of having activity that is quite open and allows people to kind of barrier-free come into safe spaces and have a go and show no commitment to an activity, and then a proportion of those may go on to engage several times with that activity, and then there may be a proportion of those who go on to achieve specific outputs and outcomes. So think about that in terms of the types of outputs and outcomes you propose, and think about those different types of needs and potentially that activity having slightly different cohorts within them and how you will record that differently. Other things to note around this fund: because of that high level of need of individuals, we really do recommend consortia partnerships and wider partnerships so that individuals are signposted and referred to different services where there are experts that can help them remove their barriers to employment and skills outcomes. One of those is likely to be our Skills Connect service. And we strongly recommend that some of our groups who are best at working with these types of residents we have in the region are our voluntary and community groups, and some of those may be very small, and some of those either small, or it might be that they don't have the capacity to support the administration and some of the funding requirements that we have around this fund. And we would strongly support collaborations and managing partnership arrangements where those groups are able to benefit from this funding, but through different delivery models where those organisations might not be able to be lead applicants themselves. So we've set a minimum grant value of 50,000 to try and support some of those smaller projects, and that might still be too much for some, and a maximum grant value of 400k. We have a minimum of 75% of those who enrol on these programmes achieving an output, and a minimum of 65% of those who do complete and achieve an output to go on to progress and achieve an outcome. Applicants as part of this fund can also be considered for our adult education budget funding. So we recognise that we have some groups out there who have previously been involved in this type of community activity, who may now be ready and have the understanding of what some of our adult education budget funding might need. That is a more sustainable pot of funding, so we very much encourage groups to consider that. And this is part of that process in supporting groups who may feel they are ready to apply to this fund and allow us to assess this bid as almost a part one of an adult education budget process, application process. And if we feel your application is appropriate for adult education budget, we'll work with you if you are interested in pursuing that, to support you to complete the additional parts of the application that would be needed to be considered under our adult education budget funding. Groups can opt out. There's no you don't have to be considered for that funding, and in the application there is a tick box to opt in, so you absolutely don't have to be part of that process. And then our fourth lot is around NEET support. So we know in our region, in certain areas, the number of young people not in employment, education and training is growing. And we also know we have groups of people who are at risk of not in education, employment and training, or actually have become NEET already, who are not covered by some of our NEET services. And there are several reasons for that. That could be that where they live geographically, they can't access those services, and it's very difficult for them to get to those services and for those services to get to them. It may be that they fall into a particular time in the academic year where there is no support to pick them up and support that transition onto their next step in the next academic year. And we even found there are certain ages who fall between support, so potentially before young people are 19 years old, there might be a gap in what they can access. So we need innovative ideas and engagement to support NEETs and pre-NEET activity where we have gaps in that provision. Because our local authorities have that statutory duty to understand their NEET cohort and keep that NEET data, it does make sense that they lead this work. So this particular lot is actually closed for local authorities to be lead application partners, lead applicants. However, we have highly recommended to our local authorities, and they agree, that wider partnerships are key as part of this work to bring in that expertise, which will reach these groups who aren't being supported, and to try new approaches that are very localised. We know our local authorities have very different plans on how they want to do that. That is very much suited to their local needs. And so if you are interested in perhaps working with that work as a wider partner or a consortia partner, and we are happy to get you in touch with those NEET contacts within those local authorities. So you'll see later some of our contact details, and just contact us and we will put you in touch. There is some crossover here, as you may be thinking, around community work that is targeted at young people most in need, and of course that is going to include groups of NEETs or pre-NEETs. So this doesn't stop other organisations applying under the communities lot and have an activity which also targets NEETs and pre-NEETs. We wouldn't look to duplicate, but of course until we get all the applications in, including the applications to our local authorities, we won't know what that duplication could be. So a potential way around that is if you are looking at projects that support young people under the community strand, that you may include NEET, but you might look at needs that are wider than NEET as well. Struggling to find my cursor to move on. So with all of those 4 lots, there's some common elements, and we've talked about those so far, some of those as we've gone through. So the first one is around that we very much welcome bids that support specific target groups who can most benefit from those interventions. And we welcome applicants to be as specific as possible about the target groups and the type of residents that you are looking to engage through your programme. And we also welcome projects which look at priority sectors. So we have provided some evidence of where employers have greatest needs across the region and in localities as part of the evidence pack that is within the application documentation, and we urge you to look at that and bring additional evidence as well. We haven't covered everything, so we are quite open in terms of what those priority skills needs of employers are, because you will be able to provide the evidence of those. That covers the second one really. So we've provided some evidence, but actually for all of the lots, we expect you as experts in the types of groups that you want to target and the types of progression pathways that you are looking at, to provide that additional information. We will also need applicants to provide evidence around the grant value that you are asking for, and that should be based on previous similar delivery and what you know about your target groups in justifying the value for money questions. We've already talked about collaboration a lot, but we know that a lot of the groups that we're looking at will have multiple barriers, and there is probably no organisation that can provide all of the wraparound supports that all types of individuals will need themselves. So it's worth thinking about the different barriers that you might come across with your participants and those wider services that are around you that can help in terms of either referring individuals onto your programme, supporting them with wraparound support whilst they're on your programme, supporting that transition into their outcome and their further progression beyond your programme. And that can be just through wider partnerships, or it could be more intense arrangements such as subcontracting, consortia partnership arrangements, or indeed we welcome that managing partner arrangements as well. We want projects to be progression focused, so we do want applicants to really think about where are your participants starting from, where will your intervention realistically get them to, and where specifically will they be moving on to after your programme to progress. And the more detailed you can be with that and more specific, the stronger your application will be. You must not duplicate. This fund is all about gaps in provision across our region, so we will not fund duplication. So we have picked these areas because we believe there are gaps, and we'll very much be making sure that there are gaps, and you will need to provide the evidence base that this does not exist, this provision in the form that you're providing. So what might be unique about your delivery may be the model of delivery. That means that it will reach specific groups who are missing out. It could be the geographical reach that you are targeting. It could be targeting new or different types of groups who haven't previously been engaged. Or it could be designing something absolutely brand new that, for example, meets our future skills needs for digital and green. We can fund projects that exist, but again, you may need to look at those new elements to it to make sure that it isn't, we aren't just funding more of the same, because again, that would be the duplication issue. And we will fund projects that are a continuation of things that have worked previously, but there is due to be a gap, because if this funding can't support your programme, you can't fund your programme through any other means, and that funding is coming to an end, and you have that evidence of that need and that gap in provision if that service wasn't there. So we want projects to be high achieving. So we do want you to have high ambitions for the number of participants that you'll work with and who will enrol with you and who will achieve outputs and outcomes. But also what we really need proposals to be is well thought out, and that means that they need to be realistic as well as have that value for money. We would really urge you not to overpromise, and that those outputs and those outcomes are based on evidence and intelligence of previous similar delivery and what you know is achievable in the current economic landscape that we work in. We know in all of our programmes, for example, we are not back to pre-COVID levels in terms of engagement, and there are different models of engaging some of the target groups that we will be looking to support through this fund, and that it takes time and it takes investment and it takes resource to engage, to keep people on skills initiatives and to move them on to progression, as well as those additional wraparound needs that we are seeing. So make sure that's all built in and all baked into your proposal, and that you are leaving yourself a little bit of wiggle room in case you have, for example, staff go on sick or a marketing campaign not quite give you the results and numbers that you need, that you're not going down to the wire in terms of the end of the programme and getting those outputs and those outcome numbers that you need. Skills Connect is going to be at the heart of this programme, and some of you will have heard of Skills Connect and some of you won't. So I'm going to go on and just explain that in a couple of slides here. So Skills Connect is really to meet our mayoral priority in the region of simplifying our skills system and making it easier for residents to navigate the support that they need. And that support is all types of skills provision, employability services, and all sorts of support around work when people are in work. So this is an all-age service. And this is also wider than just skills and employability services. This is about ensuring that people can access different types of supports that may help them to engage with those services. So that could be anything from green social prescribing activity. It could be links to mental health and wellbeing services, as an example. So this is a place, there will be a platform. It's a shame that I can't show you and include the link in the specification paperwork. It's not quite launched yet. That will be September. So this funding, the projects we fund through this fund, will initiate just at the time that we get this going. So we will be expecting projects to really embed themselves with Skills Connect and benefit from all of the resource that it can support. So on one hand is that platform, that electronic platform and that website that people can search, and we're making that search functionality really simple for our residents. And that will be fantastic for all of our projects in terms of supporting individuals to self-serve, but also help them with those signposting and referral mechanisms. But it's much more than that. So our local authorities are our spokes. We have a hub and spoke model for this delivery, and there is resource in terms of staffing within our local authorities to run our local Skills Connect services, where there is people to support individuals to use that platform and understand the different progression pathways and the different support they can access. So we're really excited about this. It will be, the vision is it is a shop front for all of our services in the region, and that is really easily accessible and really usable for individuals. Here we just have that representation of Skills Connect in a slightly different way in terms of an umbrella. So Skills Connect will bring together our combined authority, skills employability programmes, our local authorities programmes themselves, community provision of all types, our national employment and skills provision, and then our other skills providers, for example, our further education providers, higher education providers, and our independent providers in the region. So that wealth of opportunities that individuals can easily search, understand what is available to them. So that we will expect delivery partners to use Skills Connect, and we will support our delivery partners through this project to understand it better, understand where it can be weaved in and maximised within their programmes. Timelines and milestones. Couple of things to note here. This is this table here that is on the right-hand side of the slide is in all of the application paperwork. So this is just the same. I've pulled it out. But a couple of key things to note. One is around that funding is live now, and it will close on Monday, the 11th of September. We've tried to maximise the time that people have with holidays, but also think about balancing that with when we want projects to initiate. The longer we can get projects initiated, the longer you have to deliver. And then the other date to note is March 2025. So that's when delivery will all need to end. And that is a hard deadline in terms of spend of UKSPF. So that's something that you really need to think about and work backwards on in your proposal. Because you'll need to think about you cannot, if you need to fund staff through UKSPF to continue to track participants, say, outcomes for a couple of weeks after March, that will be fine, but you won't be able to claim that staff time and that administration time from UKSPF. All spend has to happen before the 31st of March. So if you can't support staff to be still collecting that final bit of data beyond March 31st, you need to make sure all claims, reporting, audit documentation, participant data is done and dusted by that 31st of March, and then work backwards. So think about things like what would be the last date that participants could enrol in your programme? When will the final outcome and data evidence be ready? And who will be completing that in your organisation? Also, another thing to think about in terms of initiation and when project starts. So once applications are in on the 11th of September, we have to score, go through moderation, and then go through 3 sets of governance. So we are looking to complete that by the end of October, which means grant offer letters could be out as early as the end of October, most likely the beginning of November, which is here, and that's when projects can start mobilising. So be thinking about that in terms of your timelines, but also coming back to that thing about being realistic. Think about how much time you need, especially if you've got wider partners and consortia partners to be doing your planning. When are you realistically going to be able to be marketing to your first cohorts of participants, for example? So please do really think carefully around the milestones and what is achievable, and how you're going to manage that deadline of everything being complete by that 31st of March 2025. Funding available. So just to go back to how our Mayoral Priority Skills funding is working, we're making approximately 2 million available over these 4 different lots. Some of that is ring fenced, so 150k for apprenticeships, for example, and 600k for our local authority to lead on needs support bids. The majority of that funding is UK Shared Prosperity funding, but we can allocate some of our Mayoral Priority funding to that as well. Because the majority of that funding is UKSPF, there are certain government requirements in terms of reporting and auditing from us that we have to adhere to, and that means we will need our delivery partners to also report and give us that information that way. If there is funding unallocated, which we expect there to be, especially under our Mayoral Priority Skills Fund, we want to keep some back so we continue that intelligence gathering around gaps in our provision. We would look to go out with further funding calls where we have that robust intelligence. We also have that longevity, like I said at the very beginning of the market engagement, about wanting Mayoral Priority Skills Fund to be that mechanism that we attract funding, increase our own funding, that we add to that, so we are continually in that cycle of intelligence gathering, identifying gaps in provision, and going out and looking for that to be delivered. Fund specific things to note: this is grant funding. It's paid quarterly in arrears and relies on evidence of defrayed spend from the lead applicant's bank account. So please do expect to be passing us evidence that shows defrayed costs from the lead applicant's bank account. Payment also relies on reporting and monitoring being up to date and acceptable achievement against outputs and outcomes achieved. So your claims process is linked to the reporting process quarterly, so make sure that your programme can support that administration for things to be done on deadline and on time. We want to pay you on time, so the more you can understand our claims processes and what we require, and we will provide support in terms of training sessions and guidance documents on that to help you stick to those deadlines. Read all of the guidance carefully in the specifications. There's no way I can put all of the detail and go through all of that in here. We don't want there to be any surprises, and that's why we've tried to add as much detail as we can around that eligible and ineligible expenditure. There are caps on things such as equipment, because this is a revenue fund, it's not capital. We have put caps on things such as participant travel, and there are exclusions of staff subsistence and staff travel, and that includes with your freelancers, so make sure you read those carefully. The other thing to note is significant underperformance can result in clawback of funding or payment below the grant value amount that you have been agreed with CEOs. There will be further details of that set out in detail, what we mean by underperformance for successful programmes in their grant offer letters. But we must do this for several reasons. One is around making sure that we get value for money. Once our CEOs have recommended projects, your application is a baseline for what we expect to be delivered, and we expect that you have then justified to a significant amount what can be delivered for the grant value that you have asked for. Of course, there are changes and there is a change request process, but that's by no means a given that your change request will be accepted. The other thing around significant underperformance is that we can have clawback ourselves from government for our UKSPF funding. So we must make sure that we deliver the outputs and the outcomes numbers that we told government we would deliver for the funding. And so if we see projects that are underperforming and we believe there is no way to turn that around or support them to change the delivery model to achieve those, we will need to reallocate those funds quick, so that by March 2025 we have spent all of our funding and we are able to record to government that we have met the priorities and the KPIs that we have set out for government. So choosing UKSPF outputs and outcomes. The biggest message to give here is please don't be put off when you look at the application documentation and specifically Appendix D around the range of outputs and outcomes that you can choose that have been set by government under UKSPF. That is because there are several options if things don't fit There is the option that you can pick your own outputs and outcomes as part of your programme, and there is the opportunity to mix things around as well. So I'll just go through some of how this is going to work. So we would expect projects to really look at Appendix D in the application paperwork and see where there is best fit for your programme. I would urge you not to do it the other way around, so not to look at the UKSPF outputs and outcomes and design your programme around that. We would rather your programme is evidence-based regionally, where you know there are gaps in provision, and then look at where the matches are to UKSPF outputs and outcomes. Depending on proposals, therefore, there'll be a variety of scenarios that might come out when you look at that Appendix D and you've got your proposal nailed down. So A, you might find that your proposal is a perfect fit with several outputs and outcomes from the tables that are provided in Appendix D and the further definitions that are provided in Appendix D against those. And that's fantastic. There'll be a link. I would urge you not to go too crazy and start setting yourself outputs and outcomes that are scattered across lots of different interventions, and I'll talk about interventions in a moment. A top tip might be for you to stick to a smaller amount of outputs and outcomes that you think are quite generic and you can be quite confident that your participants will achieve. B, you might look at your proposal and then look at Appendix D and decide there are other benefits to your programme, as well as meeting those UKSPF outcomes and outputs. And actually, the UKSPF definitions are too narrow and you would like to record other benefits that your programme achieves. And there is an other tab for you to do that. So you can completely from scratch tell us other benefits of your programme. You may feel that your proposal, especially if it has several elements, some elements completely fit UKSPF, but other parts don't. And that's fine as well. You can go to the other tab, and for the elements that you feel are not a good fit, you can set your own outputs and outcomes for those elements. You may have a scenario where none of your proposal fits with the UKSPF outputs and outcomes, and that's fine as well. Again, just add everything to the others tab, but you will need to set out your own outputs and outcomes for your proposal. Although that D is absolutely fine, and we will consider all of those scenarios, again, just keep in mind the majority of the funding is UK Shared Prosperity, and therefore we do urge you, instead of going straight to the others tab, is to really see where elements of your programme could fit. Your proposal may work with businesses, and therefore you will see in Appendix D some tabs along the bottom with the UKSPF business outputs and outcomes. It's not compulsory at all, but if you feel businesses are benefiting from your proposal, you may wish to look at those and set yourself some outputs and outcomes around that area. It is not compulsory. There is also flexibility in this. So I would say be really confident in your proposal. The number, so on the scale of the outputs and the outcomes that you propose in that Appendix D are achievable, and you're confident about that. However, on initiation, and as we start learning together, these are all new. This is a new fund, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. We start understanding the definitions a little bit more, or how we can work across those outputs and those outcomes. We can swap things around in agreement with each other. But what will be in your grant offer letter set out as a clear baseline is the number of outputs and outcomes that you have suggested under those people and skills tabs. This will make more sense when you look through it as a document. When we're talking about interventions, what we're talking about is these E numbers that you will see in that Appendix D that UKSPF has set out. It does sound a little bit like the back of a sweet packet. And broadly, those interventions are split into two areas. So E33 to E36 is all around supporting economically inactive people and those furthest from the labour market. So just make sure, you know, that it may be tempting to choose some outputs and outcomes from E33 and E36, but if your target group is people in work, they won't be eligible. So you just need to keep this in mind. E37 to E41 is supporting skills to progress in work and to fund local skills needs. E37 and E38 are very much about economically active individuals. E39, E40 and E41 are a bit of a mixture. So again, you'll just need to see what is best fit and have a read across. Further support can be offered around this. So in August, we are offering 30-minute meetings to groups when you've developed your proposal to jump on a call with myself and Maria and the team and tell us about your proposal and some of your suggestions for where you think the best fit against these is, and we can give you some advice. We're learning at the same time as you around these, but it may give you some confidence that you are on the right track in terms of the types of outputs and outcomes you are choosing. And where you are finding it challenging, we might be able to give some advice and some support. What we won't be able to do in those meetings is comment on the suitability of your proposal for the funding. That funding is live. Maria and I are deeply involved in that evaluation and the moderation of these applications, so we cannot comment whilst this is live on the suitability or be seen to give any sort of advice to one group over another. So this is purely against a proposal and matching against those outputs and outcomes. Just something to note, it should make sense when you look at that Appendix D, but if a participant is achieving an output from, say, E33, you would also expect them to achieve an outcome from E33. So you can't mix and match across different interventions. And I have highlighted in yellow E33 for employment support for economically inactive people and E37 tailored support for the employed to access courses, because in my limited experience, but looking at these seem to be the most flexible. E33 if your proposal is working with economically inactive, E37 if your proposal is working with economically active. But that's my own opinion. I think they look like the most open and flexible interventions to choose in terms of the outcomes, the outputs and the outcomes, and the definitions against those as well. Resourcing your proposal. This slide is just a quick reminder to say, ensure you have the appropriate staff with the right skills to deliver all aspects of your grant delivery. It's very rare that you find that amazing member of staff who can have expertise with delivering to your target group on the ground, managing claims processes, being an expert in writing your written reports at the end of programs. It's more likely you have people with very different skill sets who may be better and more efficient and able to deal with those different areas of your grant delivery. So I know it seems obvious, but think about that carefully. Where we see grants being delivered most successfully is that there are staff with the right skills to deliver the right areas of the grant. You may say that's easy for you to say, Nicola, we have a very small organisation and we have to be experts in delivering everything. And it may be with some of our smaller groups that you look for those managing partnership arrangements where you are supported with a managing partner who may be able to support with that administration. while you as a small organisation focus on your expertise, which is working with those people on the ground. So we very much welcome those models of delivery that ensure across a consortia partnership arrangement, people have those right skills, and that level of administration in terms of data collection and reporting is supported. Collecting accurate participant data and evidence, wider reporting and claims all needs administration. We've tried to be as open as possible in the application process around the types of data we will need to collect and how often we'll need to collect that. And at the end of the specification, there are examples of similar programs and that we have run. We haven't got the specific paperwork for these programs yet, they're still in development, but we've tried to provide you with very similar examples so you can actually think that through operationally and what that looks like and think about resourcing that. Make sure you resource at the right level. We've spoken about that contingency before. Make sure you have thought about mitigations if you need to recruit and you don't recruit on time. You know, what is your normal level of staff sickness, and is there the room in your proposal to support some of that? Just think about those sorts of things. We would like to see your staffing structure in your application, and we would like to know which roles are existing and which need recruiting to. We've already talked about outputs and outcomes and delivery being realistic. And although I've got a spelling mistake on there, you will need evidence from previous delivery to support this. Achievement of deliverables will be monitored regularly, and it's worth saying again, severe underperformance could result in a lower allocation or clawback of your funding, and that is because of the tight deadlines we are under to achieve those KPIs ourselves. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Data and evidence. So I've already said the top bullet point, which is we've tried to be really open and explicit about the types of monitoring and reporting these grants will require. We ourselves have to provide strong justifications for collecting the types of data that we do for any project. So just be under the understanding that this is carefully being considered. We will not collect anything we don't need to, but we are collecting participant data so that we can, one, provide government with the data they need around our reporting and our auditing back to UKSPF. That's why for this programme specifically, we will require delivery partners to capture and keep evidence on participants' eligibility for the programme, their achievement of outputs and their achievement of their outcome. And we will audit some of those just to check you as a delivery partner are doing that, and in case we got audited for everything in whatever circumstance, that's not going to be a huge job or cause you a huge backlog in having to go back to participants and retrospectively get that evidence. So that will be a requirement. We need to be able to provide impact data to apply for further Mayoral Priority Skills funding. I think that's really key when we're thinking about why we require you to collect the data that you collect. We need to make sure we are showing the value for money and the impact in our region of this type of funding so that we can ensure we achieve our vision of the Mayoral Priority Skills Fund having longevity and attracting further funding. We also have areas of data that we require, but we think are very important for you as delivery partners. So a good one might be understanding enrolment if participants feel they have any barriers to completing your activity. Because that's a real key one that can support you in understanding for that individual the types of referrals and signposting you might need to do for further services, how you are going to need to adapt your delivery of that programme to make it accessible for that individual, etc. So we do believe that data is also useful for you. Just a little bit more on data and evidence. How often we'll be doing it? All of this is set out in more detail in the application paperwork. We will be checking participant data monthly once projects are up and running. And that's because we want to check projects aren't falling behind. It's a huge job for groups if that has been left, and then rather than being collected almost live as that project progresses. It's much better that projects are delivered collecting that data as and when. So we will be looking at that, and we will be contacting projects if your data is falling behind. There will be more formal quarterly reporting via a written report that will be compulsory and will align with the claims process. Alongside that, it would be nice to have face-to-face or on Teams quarterly progress meetings with you. So make sure that is something that you can resource with us. We like to work in partnership with you. And this could be more if there is underperformance. Various participant data will be required. And I've already said there's details within that specification document. Something key to remember is participant eligibility must be established before participants start to take part in a programme. We cannot fund participants who are ineligible, and therefore you need to think about that in the design and the types of target groups you are working with. How are you going to establish eligibility and get that information, that evidence from them before they start the programme? And evidence of that eligibility and that achievement and outcomes is compulsory and be audited. We haven't put in the specification guidance the type of evidence we will need for eligibility, outputs and outcomes. This is purely for our UKSPF funding, and the guidance is very scarce. I believe that the government website says delivery partners will need to collect evidence that is I think it says sensible for the level of delivery. So it's very unclear, and they haven't set out any more details. So the best thing that we will do is work with successful projects at initiation to understand from you the types of evidence you are planning to collect, and we'll just work with you to check that we think that is sufficient with our UKSPF team. Government do not want this to be as administration heavy as certain other funds such as ESF or ERDF. But as this is a new fund, it's very difficult to say whether they might change their minds. So we are trying to get to a sensible place in the middle where we can justify why we are collecting the data we are, and hopefully that will work with government. Other things to note: additional social value is required above and beyond the social value that your programmes are delivering. With programmes like this, that can be a little bit confusing because you are achieving social value through the main grant funding, but we are looking for you to go above and beyond. There are more details in the application form with some examples of that. It's up to you to provide us with what you think is the appropriate level of that additional social value against the grant amount that you're applying for. Match funding isn't compulsory for this fund, but if you are using match to support your programme, either in kind or financial, please do record that. It's really useful for us to understand in reality what it requires to deliver your programme successfully. We welcome projects to explore digital badging. So we have a digital badging membership that we have invested in. Digital badges are what they say on the tin, and we can of course provide further information. There's links in the specification pack. But they are badges that individuals can gain for achieving certain outcomes and outputs on a programme where there's no formal qualification, but they can take that with them and use it on email signatures or CVs or social media, and it will have a description of what they have taken part in and what they have achieved and the skills that they have gained as a result of that. So it's also a tool to help those individuals to talk about and apply why achieving that milestone was useful to them. So we will help groups if they want to develop digital badges, and we will really welcome that, and that will be at no additional cost to you. And there'll be support available to aid delivery through the project teams, through our project team, in our hub and spoke model. So we have an officer who will be supporting projects throughout delivery to support with claims, data collection, and that can include coming out and say working with your finance teams if there's any issues around claims, providing training sessions, additional guidance, etc. And we have our regional outreach officer, and the role of our regional outreach officer on the team is to support now in terms of when funding is live. They are not involved at all in the scoring or evaluation or the funding process, so they can absolutely be out and about talking to organisations and groups about your proposal specifically. They won't be able to tell you whether it will definitely get funded. That's not it won't be up to them, and they won't be on the panel, but they can say whether it's a best fit to the specification and help you interpret any of that specification documentation. Or indeed support you with finding the consortia, wider partnership arrangements that you're looking for, that we very much welcome. And that support will continue from that regional outreach officer into initiation. So they'll be there to support with those links between programmes. They may be the person coming out and supporting you with those quarterly meetings, or if you're finding or expecting a change in your programme and you want some advice around good practice about maybe tweaking delivery, if that's what you need to do, or what other people are doing around certain challenges, they will be a key person. So we are providing that additional support through this fund. Next steps. So this market engagement that you are watching, you have found on the website. That is the website where you will find all of the application documentation as well. There is an FAQ document which should go live at the same time as this recording, so that should already be there. It will be updated regularly, the FAQ document, so if you've got questions as a result of today, if you send them to that email address that's on the bottom of this slide, skills@westofengland-ca.gov.uk, with call 1 Mayoral Priority Skills Fund in the title with your question, you will find your answer in that FAQ document. Do give us a couple of days, but they will appear at some point, so keep your eye on those. There will be support to discuss your application. We have no idea of demand though, so there is that one regional outreach officer. They are actually changing roles as well, so we will make sure you have tried your best to find those answers in the FAQs or the specifications. If it's simple things, it would be frustrating for our engagement officer to simply be pointing to areas of the specification in those meetings. There'll be further networking to support innovative partnerships, depending on when you're watching this. They may be up and coming, they may be finished. I'll talk about those in a minute. And we've already talked about those 30-minute meetings. We won't be able to discuss the suitability of your proposal to the funding. Again, another spelling mistake there, dear. But what we will be able to do is check the match to the outputs and the outcomes and give you some advice on that. Any questions, go to that skills website if you can't find them. Submitting your application, just a couple of details here because they may be different to what you've done before. Application will close on the 11th of September, Monday. You get all day Monday, that close on midnight. Instructions are in the specification document along with a tick list. Please triple check everything is attached. Please add a read receipt. This is going to an email inbox. You will receive a formal confirmation on your submission. I think it's 2 working days. For whatever reason though, if you don't receive that soon after sending your application, and just check that hasn't gone in your junk folder. If you don't receive that confirmation of submission, you must get in touch. And in that circumstances, my personal email is in your specification guidelines to get in touch directly. For the first time, we have in our application documentation where you can opt in for your application to be considered for wider funding. That's internally or externally in the CA if we think there is a best fit. In reality, what we will do if we are passing your application to another funding stream, we would let you know and probably ask you again if you are happy with that. But it would be useful for you to indicate whether that's something you would like us to do. In case it isn't a good fit for our fund. And we've decided that that will only last for 6 months, because what tends to happen is you as an organisation may be in a different place. Your proposal might need tweaking or might no longer be suitable after that. So we have put an expiry date on that. Application paperwork, I won't go through it in too much detail, but just make sure those documents are submitted. And then just thinking about your role. So we have explored this a little bit in this market engagement, but there are different ways to be involved. You may sit there and think, I might not be able to be a lead applicant myself, but I'd like to be involved either as a subcontractor through maybe a consortia partnership arrangement, or simply a wider partner in terms of UHAS services that participants in this programme may want to link with. And we do very much welcome that managing partnership arrangement, so that we can have our smaller groups or groups who might not be able to meet those grant requirements being supported by some of our larger organisations. You can get in touch to discuss that further if there's specific connections you would like us to make through that skills email on the previous slide. Or you can explore that further at our facilitated networking session if they haven't already happened. So these sessions will not talk about the technicalities of the funding. They will literally be providing you with a room to have these discussions around those arrangements in terms of collaborations. So Thursday the 3rd of August will be one around communities and needs. Friday the 5th of August will be around modular courses, and Monday the 7th will be themed around apprenticeship support. So do come along. If you've missed those, do just get in touch if there's something we can help you with around this aspect of your grant. You can also submit to us, although this was something we used at the live face-to-face market engagements. If you want to comment or you need something additional, you can use this QR code as well as emailing us as well. But I'll probably nip back to that one as the final slide. So you'll find everything on the website page where you have found this market engagement. And again, I might just nip back and show you in case you missed it. This is the email address you need if you have any questions or you need anything. Everything should be there, quite detailed, the specifications and the application documents, but of course we could miss something, which would be very sensible questions. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and good luck with your application. And we look forward to receiving it. Thank you very much. Bye.